What's going on, guys? This is VinylicPuma, back with another Borderlands 2 countdown video, and today I wanted to go over 10 of what I think are among some of the worst guns and weapons to farm for in Borderlands 2. Now, before we start, this video is primarily going to focus on weapons that are just hard to get and or a pain in the butt to actually farm for, rather than any guns that are bad. And as always, feel free to leave some of your good but least favorite guns to actually farm for in the comments section below. Otherwise, and without further ado, let's go ahead and start with number 10, and that is going to be the Bekaa Assault Rifle. Of all of the pearlescents, I'd say the Bekaa is probably the most valuable of the Generation 2 pearlescents. And unlike their Generation 1 counterparts, the Bekaa, along with the other Generation 2 pearlescents, tend to be much harder to acquire, as you have to get lucky and have one drop from a tubby after level 61 in Ultimate Voltage mode, where the Generation 1 pearlescents can simply come from many other sources, including legendary loot midgets, or from oh my god what the heck on OP8 difficulty during a Digistruct Peak run. If you can manage to get the Bekaa to drop though, then you'll find it's easily one of, if not the best assault rifles in the game. Not only can you fire single shots as fast as you can pull the trigger, but the Bekaa has this cool trailing bullet effect, which allows up to 3 additional projectiles to hit an enemy per trigger pull. It also doesn't hurt that these secondary projectiles are unlisted, which means the Bekaa goes great with the B-Shield, and you should be able to really dish out the pain, especially if you can get some of those unlisted projectiles to land some critical hits. I guess to be fair, the Bekaa isn't really any harder to acquire than any of the other Generation 2 pearls, but it is certainly the most valuable one that you're going to want, and I would say that it is definitely tougher to get than many of its Generation 1 pearlescent counterparts, especially if you want a Bekaa with the right parts and prefix. Ultimately, just be on the lookout for tubbies, because if you can get this thing, it is an awesome weapon. Number 9. The Pitchfork Sniper Rifle. Now, this may be one of the more controversial picks on this list, and someone may tell me that they get these to drop all of the time. However, I rarely ever see these things drop when farming Terra Morphus, and in my experience, I tend to see something like the hide of Terra Morphus a lot more often. As for the gun itself, the Pitchfork is often overlooked in favor of other sniper rifles, like the much easier to acquire Lyuda or Pimpernel. However, I'd say the Pitchfork is definitely in the top 10, and potentially even in the top 5, depending on the situation. While the 5 horizontal projectile bursts aren't all that useful against most enemies, the Pitchfork does work fairly well up against larger enemies, where it's much easier to get all of those projectiles to hit on target. Plus, since a lot of these projectiles are unlisted, and much like the Bekaa, they receive full amp damage from the B-Shield, which can make the Pitchfork great for taking out anything that's really big, like Saturn, Terra Morphus, or some other type of big enemy. Now, while I wouldn't say that the Pitchfork is quite as essential or as good as something like the Sandhawk, the Pitchfork is a good weapon and will work very well against an enemy that's really big. Just be aware that you may have a hard time getting your hands on one of these things, especially if you're looking for one in the right element and with the right parts. Number 8. The Norfleet Launcher. In terms of acquisition, I would say that the Norfleet is pretty difficult to acquire. Provided you don't have DLC, you have to manage to spawn Vermivorous, which in and of itself is difficult and usually requires 4 players to have any chance of that happening. Alternatively, the player has to repeatedly farm Hyperius from the Captain Scarlet DLC, which is a raid boss that I would say tends to be noticeably harder than Terra Morphus. Granted, I guess you could always Godbore Hyperius with 0, but you may not have access to a max level 0. Thus, it may actually be a little bit easier to do Vermivorous, but you have to have 4 people, and then again, assuming you can beat Hyperius repeatedly, that method seems like it would be more efficient. So I guess you're just gonna have to pick one, as both definitely have their downsides. Now, I don't think I need to go into too much detail about the Norfleet, as it's basically Borderlands 2's take on the Doom franchise's BFG 9000, and allows you to clear rooms full of mobs. It's the game's best rocket launcher, and considering that fact, it makes some sense that it's fairly difficult to get, whether you decide to go through the trouble of spawning and farming Vermivorous, or if you decide to take on the noticeably more difficult Hyperius. The struggle to get the Norfleet is definitely worth it, as it does make the game a lot easier. Just try not to get too upset if you end up farming for this thing for a long time. Number 7. The Teeth of Terra Morphus Shotgun. I suppose the Breath of Terra Morphus grenade mod could be included with this shotgun. However, in my experience, and like I said when I was talking about the Pitchfork, I found that pretty much all of the Terra Morphus loot, with the exception of the Hide of Terra Morphus shield for some reason, is all kind of hard to get. However, compared to the Pitchfork, I would say that it's actually harder to get the Teeth of Terra Morphus due to how the teeth tends to blend in with a lot of the other blues that appear as a result of the loot explosion upon defeating Terra Morphus. Thus, it may actually drop a little more frequently than, say, the Pitchfork or Hide of Terra Morphus, but the fact that it's so much more difficult to find once it drops can definitely prove to be a problem. As for the gun itself, it's alright in my opinion. The projectile pattern is weird as it's horizontal and the chomping motion limits the weapon's range, but you can actually get the weapon to work fairly well thanks to its ability to benefit from grenade damage bonus. That said, I do find myself getting frustrated with that projectile pattern sometimes, so I suppose you could skip the Teeth of Terra Morphus if you wanted to. What I think we can say is that this thing is definitely hard to get, and if you do want to try and farm for it, just be sure to bring a fine-tooth comb. Number 6. The Twister Shotgun. As I'm sure many of you know, the Twister is an awesome shotgun. Not only can characters like Axton boost the weapon's damage via grenade damage bonus, but other characters like Zero can make great use of it thanks to Boar, Maya can use it with Phase Lock and a Lady Fist to do some passive crit boosting, and thanks to the swirling/tornado projectile pattern, characters like Gage can use it with high anarchy stacks with minimal accuracy issues. Not to mention that Gage has Wires Don't Talk, which allows her to boost the weapon's shock damage, which makes the Twister a really great choice on her specifically. The reason this gun is on this list, though, has to do with the enemy that drops it, which is Omenomadok, aka Triple O. Normally, in order to get this guy to spawn, you have to get Witch Doctors to evolve an ultimate badass savage into Triple O. The problem is, and more often than not, Witch Doctors will suddenly just stop evolving badass savages and only heal them. Thus, you get into a situation where you have to leave for some time or save and quit and try again, which can be frustrating as Witch Doctors themselves are fairly formidable. Add in trying to get them to properly evolve a badass savage into Triple O, and all of this becomes incredibly stressful. Obviously, this sucks for anyone that likes the Twister as it's difficult and painful to farm, especially if you want an ideal version with the vertical grip or Rustler's prefix. Hopefully, you won't have too much trouble farming for this one, as it really is a great weapon, assuming you can get your hands on it. Number 5. The Ahab Launcher. While the Ahab isn't necessarily all that great on its own, it's fairly infamous for being the highest base damage Torg rocket launcher in the game, which makes it perfect to pair with Torg rocket launcher based glitches. For example, you can fire a legendary flak shotgun, then swap to an Ahab to deal an insane amount of damage. Alternatively, you can play as Salvador, you can dual wield a flacker and an Ahab, and you can eliminate the need for weapon swapping. Plus, you can wield some other weapons like a Pimpernel in place of the flacker, and you should be able to deal some crazy damage that way as well, which is certainly a reason why you might want an Ahab Launcher. The problem is that you have to fight Master Gi to get this thing to drop, and even then, it's not always guaranteed. While I wouldn't say that Master Gi is necessarily as hard as some of the other raid bosses you might encounter, he is definitely a pain to fight, as you have to strategically eliminate sandworms in such a way that he runs over them, allowing you to deplete his shield and potentially remove his immortality. However, you have to juggle that with not trying to incur corrosive stat effects yourself, which is definitely annoying, especially if you have to farm him repeatedly like you would in order to get an Ahab. If you can get the Ahab to drop from Master Gi, it's definitely nice to have on pretty much any character. Failing that though, you could always use a Nukem, which is weaker for the Flacker, Ahab, or Pimperhab glitches, but is overall a much better functioning launcher for conventional use. Plus, it's just way easier to acquire as well. Number 4. The Interfacer Shotgun. Considering how essential this shotgun is for Salvador, it's kind of a shame that it drops from Veracitus, which is easily the game's most difficult raid boss. After all, Verastis is just really fast, he hits hard, and you can only get back up from Fight for Your Life so many times until you start to run out of little midgets to kill. Plus, if you're unfortunate enough to not kill Chief Nugawatsu in time, he can give his shield to Verastis, which is absolutely massive and can make the fight much, much harder. Thus, it can be a good idea to bring a trespasser to quickly kill the chief to prevent Vora from getting his shield, and then you can focus all of your efforts on Verastis itself. In general, though, the Interfacer is Borderlands 2's strongest Hyperion shotgun, surpassing both the Butcher and Conference Call in terms of critical hit damage. In fact, the Interfacer is potentially stronger than even the Unkempt Herald, provided you are able to consistently score criticals, which makes this perfect for going up against the vast majority of raid bosses. Especially on Salvador, as he can mitigate the Interfacer's high ammo consumption by simply just regenerating any lost ammo through gunzerking. Honestly though, I do wish this thing was a little easier to get, as having an Interfacer before fighting Verastis makes that fight easier. But if you can manage to beat Verastis and get a practicable version of the Interfacer, you're going to have what is one of the best weapons in Borderlands 2. Number 3. The Hive Launcher. In a way, the Hive is one of the more perplexingly rare items on this list. After all, Saturn's loot pool also consists of the legendary Invader Sniper Rifle, and given its legendary status, you'd think it would be much more difficult to acquire than the Hive. However, upon checking around online and seeing if other people have had an easy time of getting their hands on a Hive Launcher, it definitely does appear that the Hive is really hard to get, and potentially even harder to get than the Invader is. It's unclear as to how low the drop rates are for the Hive, but based on my own personal experience, I think I've only seen it drop once, and I've been playing Borderlands 2 for like the past 5 years. Granted, I only really actively farmed for it maybe once or twice, and you may have better luck, but don't be surprised if you have a really hard time getting your hands on the Hive. As for the launcher itself, the Hive is easily one of Borderlands 2's best unique launchers, and has a cool gimmick that allows you to deal damage primarily by allowing the homing needles to hit and deal corrosive damage to enemies. Plus, it's also cool that the Hive is able to receive full amp damage bonuses from the B-Shield due to how these projectiles are unlisted, which can be great if you plan on using the Hive regularly. Otherwise, I don't think there's much else to say about the Hive. All I can say is that I wish you good luck in trying to get this thing, as it definitely has the potential to drive you crazy in the process. Number 2. The Ogre Assault Rifle. So any of you that have been with this channel long enough know that I have a somewhat strained relationship with the Ogre. While I personally don't like it, it can be a pretty powerful weapon with the right build. It's also got some interesting passive abilities, like the ability to randomly improve fire rate and reload speed, as well as allow the Ogre's projectiles to ricochet for a short period of time, which can prove to be useful on occasion. That said, and aside from the Ogre being a spinning gun assault rifle, I think what irks me the most is just how difficult it is to get one of these things. This is because it can only drop from a unique orc warlord named Warlord Slog. On top of that, this specific orc warlord only appears in Murderland's Temple and only during the 6th round of the badass version of the Magic Slaughter side quest. Thus, you have to go through a ton of enemies to get Warlord Slog to spawn, which can prove to be very stressful and difficult. Plus, it's also not like the Ogre is the single best assault rifle in the game or anything, which kinda makes me question whether it's actually even worth it or not. What I will say is that the Ogre is definitely a cool gun, but I might rather go through the trouble of acquiring something else like a Hail, Lead Storm, or even a Kitten, as I think all three are much easier to acquire and are actually potentially even better than the Ogre is. It's up to you, but be prepared to go through a lot of pain in order to get the Ogre to drop. Number 1. The Cobra Sniper Rifle. So, the Cobra's reputation for being rare is pretty infamous among the community. This was originally because the Cobra's drop rate was really low, with a Gearbox employee at one point confirming that the Cobra had something like a 0.88% chance to drop from one of Pete's burners every time a sniper rifle dropped. Given that Pete's burners didn't always drop snipers, you can imagine how difficult it was to get a Cobra back in the day. In fact, there's a good chance that if you had one back in the day, you likely had to have someone dupe theirs for you, or you had to make one yourself via the Gibbed save editor. While the drop rates have been improved for the Cobra since the October 2015 patch for Borderlands 2, I'd still say the Cobra is pretty freaking rare. Which is a shame, since it's actually a pretty decent and unique sniper rifle. After all, it's really the only sniper in the game that deals explosive damage, and the blast radius on it can be really nice on Maya, provided you pair it with phase lock related skills like Converge and Ruin. If you want one, your best bet to get a Cobra is to just run the beatdown over and over again in the hopes that you can get this thing to drop. Personally, I think I've only seen it drop once since the October 2015 patch dropped, but you may get lucky and have it drop on your first try. At the end of the day, it's still a pain in the butt to get your hands on a Cobra, but if you can, you are going to be pretty pleased with yourself. Alright guys, I think that's going to wrap up this particular video. If you liked this video, feel free to leave a like, click the bell so you can be notified when I upload more videos, and as always, and again, thank you all so much for supporting this channel. Take care, and I'll see you all in the next one.